Thank you, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know if I should say good frozen evening or good, because what is really happening here? Literally, we've had a 70 degrees change in the weather since from yesterday to today. So I will just say good evening. I hope everyone is safe and warm. Last night was certainly a bit of a doozy, and thank you all so much for joining us for this kind of like, oh, we're talking about traumas, bit of a very serious topic here. So we're going to try to bring this information to you in such a way where you can see the easy fit of embedding authentically trauma-informed practices within a multi-tiered system of supports. What you're seeing in front of you right now is tier one. So, I mean, MTSS is a lot in and of itself, but certainly to talk about embedding trauma within a framework, to try to do everything all at once would just be a little bit much. So today is simply that kind of low-hanging fruit of talking about this and what it looks like at that universal tier one foundational practice of MTSS. And then the next one, and you'll see a slide about that later on this evening, March 5th, we'll drill down a little bit more with like the tiers 2 and 3, which I hate talking about tiers, but that's kind of how we know it. But the more targeted and individualized supports that might be needed to be built within your MTSS framework for building student resilience to trauma. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. As Susie said, this is brought to you. Our host this evening is Early Childhood Professional Learning in collaboration with Illinois MTSS Network. And for those of you that don't know, Illinois is one of the few states that has a pre-K through grade 12 multi-tiered system of supports infrastructure in place. So whenever and wherever it's applicable, because early childhood really is birth to age 8. So we kind of in that EI stage and that pre-K stage, and then morphing or transitioning into that school age stage of K through 3, whenever and wherever it's applicable. We really do try to bring you joint messaging from the early childhood and the Illinois MTSS network so that we can have consistency of practices and continuity of care, especially as we're hearing more and more from the federal level. I just saw something that National Head Start put out the other day, where we're really starting to have those deeper conversations about the importance of not losing children and families as they transition from the early childhood education and care world to kindergarten. Here's a little bit about me. Just a little bit about myself. I'm an independent consultant, work that I do here in Illinois, and then, of course, across the country and on the federal level. I'll let Lori just talk about herself real quick here.
Hi, I'm Lori Hensold. I'm the director of the Illinois MTSS Network. We have a long history in the state with several state personnel development grants, and you might have heard of us as the Illinois Aspire or Illinois RTI Network, and we are now happily situated at Northern Illinois University in the Division of Outreach, Engagement, and Regional Development, still serving schools to strengthen their MTSS for pre-K through 12.
Thanks, Lori. And of course, she'll be back a little bit later on. Housekeeping. We do not take a formal break at all. We're going to go straight through right till 5:30. We do want everyone to be self-attuned. Take care of yourself. If you need to get up like our friend Kermit here, get a graham cracker. Listen, I've got my tea right here with my tea with ginger and echinacea and honey right here with me. So if you need to just, again, take care of yourself, get up, stretch your legs, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, whatever you might need to do. We really want you to go ahead and do that. Keep your sound on so you can hear and then come on back. I'm really going to linger on this slide right here a little bit longer than I typically do because we are talking about trauma-informed practices. And of course, we are talking about them when it comes to the children that we serve. But the truth is, as you talk about trauma and the types of trauma that people have experienced, we may see ourselves in some of these definitions, right? And if that is the case, again, if you need to turn your camera off, if you need to kind of get up and stretch, step away for a minute, certainly please take care of yourself. And I'm just thinking of, and in the field that I'm in, I've had several times where adult family members have said to me, oh, I never knew that I had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder until we were going through the process of having my son or daughter diagnosed. And as we were sitting with the psychologist and they were asking all these questions, the family member would say, you know what, Dr. Taylor, I was not only answering yes for my child, but I was realizing, oh, you know what? When I grew up, that was me as well. And so as we talk about the, trauma, and again, how trauma is currently defined, take care of yourself. And I'm excited as we go on a little bit. Our new law in our state is explicit about the care for children and adults as well. But again, self-attune, take care of yourself. And if you need support from anything that kind of pops up here, please reach out to someone. We're going to try to help you a little bit with that by taking the grammar off of your shoulders. As educators, we like cross every T and dot every I. This is a safe space, as Susie said. A lot of our conversations will be in the chat. We might have a couple of times where we might say, look and see what someone said. We might ask you to come off mute if you'd like to share, but most of our communications are done today here in the chat. We do save the chat so that we can look it over, especially because ECPL is always using your feedback to determine what else is needed in that professional learning world. And I know Illinois MTSS network, they do that as well. As MTSS is a very flexible framework, right? It's kind of, you're going to see us talking about a lot of bricks and houses, but it's one of those like breathable houses, kind of like the Harry Potter houses. Clearly, I watched too many movies. I've already talked about Frozen, and I'm talking about Harry Potter. But it can move, and it's meant to move and be flexible as our times and needs change. So we're gonna just try to help you out with that, being self-attuned today. Jump on, no judgment here. Don't worry about did I spell that right. Just jump right on in the chat when we ask you to do so. And we're just gonna go ahead and get started with the why of this. Why ECPL even thought, well, if we're going to do this series on MTSS, should there also be a MTSS kind of mini series on that involves trauma? And here's why. In our state, it was commonly known as Senate Bill 2109. It's now a law. And these are some excerpts from that law, beginning with the 23-24 school year. Trauma-informed practices must be in place for students and staff. Here is what some of that language says. The training regarding trauma-informed practices for students and staff required by this law, information must include the law. The law says what it may include, but it's very, very clear to say, but is not limited to. And here is what the tenets of the law says: the recognition of and care for trauma in who? Students and staff. The relationship between staff wellness and student learning, right? We know even in our household, if you have a child, or if you're a godparent, an aunt, uncle, whatever you might be, your wellness is attached to the children that are around you. And I'm so grateful for this law, because the law is making us have to explicitly remember, if you take care of the staff, the trickle down impact of that is that it improves student achievement, it improves the student outcomes, and it also improves the wellness and outcomes for your staff. It also talks about how there can be an effect of trauma on student behavior. This is not to say that every child that is in your midst that exhibits what we would call atypical or challenging behavior is a child that has been impacted by trauma. They're not synonyms of child that, trauma informed and challenging behavior, but we do want to recognize that if trauma impacts a student's social emotional development, then obviously that impacts their social emotional learning, and that impacts their social emotional competency, and that can look like the inability to self-regulate. That can look like an impeding to learning. So here's just the tenets of that law. I'm going to go back so that you can see it again. It's SB 2109. It is commonly known now as Public Act 1020638. Here are two other parts of that law: the prevalence of trauma among students, including the prevalence of trauma among student populations at higher risk. Who are some who are at higher risk? It could be a student that has a diagnosis that requires specialized services, either for under IDEA, they have an IEP, or specialized services under Rehabilitation Act. We know that a certain areas based off of socioeconomic status, and that basically just means, years ago in our state, the Risk and Reach report came out. And it was such a good report because what that report did is it, first of all, said, stop saying children are at risk. Risk is situated in the environment that is around children, and then that risk can then impact the children, the imprint on the children, and then that's what comes into the learning environment. But the other part of their report was reach. And reach was all about, okay, where there is risk situated in the environment, what is in that environment that can support wraparound for children and families? And that's what they call the reach, right? And so we already know that in some of our populations, in our state and in some of our communities, that the risk may be there, but the reach, meaning the services, food deserts. Lately, you've been hearing a lot about preschool for all deserts, right? Hospitals. Where is it where care is easily available for people? If that reach is not there for the care, then it exasperates that higher risk for those experiencing trauma. And then the effects of implicit or explicit bias on recognizing trauma among student groups in connection with race, ethnicity, gender identity. All of these things are within the law. And as we're doing training around it, the law is requiring that all of these things are included in the training, and that we're just remembering them as their self. Here's something else: effective district and school practices are shown to prevent and mitigate. So that prevention word is real huge when it comes to MTSS, because that universal foundational tier of MTSS is not about responding to children when they don't learn well or when we might see challenging behavior. It's about laying that foundation that says, we know that these evidence-based practices are tried, they're true. You can generalize them for students who are multilingual learners. You can generalize them and transfer them for students who have a disability, for students who are in care. There's a plethora of when we say diverse learners, although some districts use that specifically to mean specialized services. In fact, we are all diverse. None of us come as a monolith to anything that we're there's no such thing as all women, all men, all first graders, all children that have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So as we look at prevention, that proactive is just like with anything else. We know that when children come to school, we don't expect them to know how to read on day one, especially in the early years. We build the foundation that says we're putting what we need so that we can teach them how to read, teach them math, teach them STEAM, wink, wink, Lori, science, technology, engineering, and math. So we're really thinking about the prevention, and then the mitigation really comes from that tiers 2 and 3. If you think about, okay, we've got these preventive and proactive in our foundational practices. Now, mitigating means when we recognize that we have a student that may need more from us, what are our targeted supports going to be for those few? And then what our individualized support or more intensive supports may be for that one or two students. And again, written within the law, it literally says support the emotional wellness of staff. So all that leads us to how we're able to take an MTSS framework and think about, oh, okay, wellness for staff, trauma-informed practices. Well, Every Student Succeeds Act is like the key, the golden key to this. When we transitioned from No Child Left Behind to Every Student Succeeds Act, a couple of things happened. We changed the language and the law from scientifically based research with evidence based. And that evidence base gave us a framework that allowed us to have what I call an asset based mindset when it comes to children. So RTI was kind of making us think about, well, what students are struggling? What are we going to do about those students struggling? ESSA gave us this lift to say, no, it's really about leading to and sustaining student outcomes, and namely improving student achievement. It gave us that flexibility, just like I said earlier. MTSS is meant to be a flexible structure. So Every Student Succeeds Act gave us the flexibility to really broaden our thinkings around what it means to have a tiered system of supports. And then look what all it gave us. Improved outcomes for whom? High performing students, students who are multilingual learners. Even if you look down, improve school safety and climate and safety, create safe and supporting learning environments, and then that supports students' mental and behavioral health. Notice they didn't say mental challenges, behavioral challenges. Those students, supporting students' mental and behavioral health, we can do all of that through a multi-tier system of support framework. And then, of course, that necessary ongoing professional development. All of that comes to us through Every Student Succeeds Act. So this slide kind of takes us from that shift of, well, response to intervention was a very deficit-based model, and MTSS takes multiple tiered supports that are evidence-based. That's your curriculum, your assessment, evaluations, the kindergarten individual development survey, whatever it is that you may be doing. It takes those multiple tiered supports and creates a system where that system is asset based. So that kind of leads to the question, can you have a conversation about trauma and say it's asset based? And the answer to that is yes, we can, because we just saw that law that said, well, there's a proactive piece to understanding that trauma and wellness. And the truth is, if we look at it through the lens of MTSS, we're now synthesizing it and integrating it into everything that we do, so that we use evidence-based practices to have systems in place before we even see a student or know a student has been impacted by trauma. And that asset, it's kind of like when children struggle, or like when we're teaching children to read. The reason why we put those supports in place is because we believe that if we do everything we can on our end, and we've got that working agreement with families, that children can learn. And you hear that all the time. All children can learn. In fact, Illinois' equity statement actually says, if we put the right system in place, all children have the ability to learn, not at the same rate and maybe not at the same level, but all children can. So that asset base is really kind of a way of saying, we know that children have experienced trauma. Some of us have experienced trauma, but that does not stop us from being able to learn. And I put that into this. This is how I think about this. So we have a federal law that's commonly known as IDEA. It's really known as the Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act, but we get rid of that improvement and we just call it IDEA. And here's what IDEA says. It's actually written in the law that disability is a natural part of the human experience. But it doesn't diminish the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. And one way we can do that is by improving educational results for children with disabilities, and an essential element of our national policy of ensuring what? Equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. Now, that's what the Congress says about disability. I did some poetic licensing, and this is what I'm saying to us. Trauma is a natural part of the human experience. We hate that we have to say that, but we do know that it is true. But experiencing trauma in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate or contribute to society. When we include the understanding of trauma in our educational results for children, and I put that in there, and adults who have experienced trauma, that's an essential element of our national policy of equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, all of those things. Now, why do we say that trauma is a natural part of the human experience? It can be real easy to say, oh, that's because of COVID, right? Because of COVID, and then we have the tridemic, COVID, RSV, and the flu. Uh, of course, we've had some civil unrest in our country, wars, rumor of wars, the political climate. But that's not really why. We would say trauma is a natural part of the human experience. And the reason we can say that is because adverse childhood experiences has been around for a long time. CDC has been talking about whole child, whole school, whole community. And if you remember your days back when we were in school, Bronfenbrenner's theory about the exosystem, it told us all about the fact that, you know what, you have the child at the center, and anything that happens in the family impacts the child. If it happens in the community, it impacts the family, it impacts the child. If it happens, in the world, it affects the community, so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily because of these things that trauma exists. Of course, these things could exasperate trauma, but really we've been talking about trauma for a long time. In our country, I think we're at a very pivotal moment where, because of some of the more recent events, these things are heightened, and we're really realizing the importance of, okay, including this in our staff wellness, our staff development, and for children. Under ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, there are three major categories. And look at that first 18 years of life. So that's almost literally birth until the student is ready to graduate according to where their birthday is, even graduate and go on to college. So here's the three categories. And here again is where I just want to remind us to be self-attuned. If we need to step back, please make sure that you take care of yourself. Under the subcategory of abuse, it's these things. One who has experienced emotional abuse, physical abuse, and/or sexual abuse. Under the category of neglect, it's emotional neglect and/or physical neglect. Under the subcategory of household challenges, maybe you witnessed a mother being treated violently, substance abuse in the household, mental illness in the household, particularly mental illness that may have gone undiagnosed, therefore untreated, a parental separation or divorce, and/or a household member who went to prison. Those are things that are covered under ACEs. And so when you look at that, that takes us back to me saying, oh, this is a natural part of the human experience. As we went through that, I myself went through a divorce, right? So not only did I go through divorce, I have a son and a daughter. They were very young when that happened. They experienced it as well. And I'm not the only one in the whole world that's ever gone through that. So when you kind of look at those categories, I didn't put how they're defined in here, but when you look at that, we can say that it's a natural part of the human experience. And so we want to always be prepared to support all of us, our learning, our daily life experiences, for anything that we would say um, is a natural part of what we might have experienced or could experience in the future. So when we look at MTSS, here's one of those pre-K through grade 12 infrastructure things. This is the common definition that we use in Illinois, was actually created by the MTSS network. The Early Childhood MTSS Consortium is facilitated by ECPL. And so as soon as Cindy Berry saw that Illinois MTSS network had that definition, it was immediately adopted so that we would use it on the early childhood side as well. But note here that it's talking about providing a coherent continuum of support responsive to meet the needs of all learners. We don't necessarily just see, math, language arts, science there. What are the things that come to an learning environment where children will need support, students will need support? And if you've ever heard me talk about MTSS, you have heard me say over and over and over again, the law is explicit that this is an educational practice, but best practice would help us to know if you're going to have a tiered system of supports for students, you need a tiered system of support for staff. So as you think about what we're talking about today, especially if there's any administrators on with us, think about what this will look like as you support your staff and their own wellness to help them be prepared to implement trauma-informed practices in their daily classroom experiences in a way that is authentic, embedded, differentiated, and scaffolded. So when we look at the purpose of MTSS, we do want to provide that evidence-based quality experience for who? The whole child. And this is our whole child. The whole child has unique needs and abilities, academic, behavioral, social, emotional, cultural, environmental, and then of course, wellness. So today we are focusing on that universal level. And that's that area where you're talking about the continuum that responds to the needs of all learners. It's universal. I want to press pause here and say, whenever you're talking about children who have a diagnosis, that means they have an IEP, they have a 504 plan, whatever it is that you're doing when it comes to MTSS, first of all, universal, all literally means all. So we don't have a practice where we say, oh, well, we're doing this for all of our students, but these kids over here, they have an IEP, so we're not doing this for them because they're already getting their needs met. MTSS, whatever we are doing, all literally does mean all because it's evidence-based. I would also just want to remind us, especially because of the laws in Illinois around MTSS, anything that we're doing, the first point of reference, if the child has a documented disability, is it must either be informed by the plan or included in the plan. So anything that might be specific around trauma that you would be doing, yes, it does include all learners, twice exceptional, gifted and talented, students who are multilingual learners, as I said before, students with disability. My only caveat, and I just want to remind everyone that whatever it is that we're doing, your first point of reference, look at that IEP. Is it already written in the plan? If it is not, and we believe that we have practices and things that we want to do for that child, we must make sure that it is inclusive in the plan. So either the plan informs And if the plan doesn't inform, like it's already in the IEP, Individualized Education Program, or the 504 plan, then we must go back to the table with data and the evidence to show why we want to perhaps amend the IEP or revisit the 504 plan or the Individualized Education Program to put those specific pieces of information in there. So today we're only going to be talking about that universal. And although y'all know me and the triangle, we kind of like we combative with each other. But I love this. This actually is a slide from Illinois MTSS Network because it shows that universal does not ever stop. So when we find out that we have some students that might need targeted supports from us, we're still doing our universal practice because that's our foundation. And if we find that some students need not only the universal, but our targeted, but some might need more intensive support, it's really the layering on, not taking away. So here we're thinking about that tier one, universal or foundational evidence-based practices. Everything we're talking about today and then in our last session on MTSS for this academic year is really about knowing that we need to put trauma-informed practices right into that foundation. And so brick by brick, as we're building and we're looking at curriculum, instruction, assessment, data collection, chronic absence, these are all of our bricks. I like to say that you see that kind of mortar, that's MTSS, because without something that holds all those bricks together, you have a lot of bricks that can easily be knocked over. It's the mortar that you layer and it goes in between the bricks that makes that literally, I was going to say makes a house a home, but makes that foundation one that is durable, attainable, and sustainable. So then if you look at all of these things listed here and we look at those question marks, now we know that asset-based trauma evidence-based practices goes in here. And there's that need for synthesizing because as you lay your bricks, as you build that structure, you're constantly looking to say, okay, social emotional development. Do we have a curriculum for social emotional development? Well, how does that curriculum speak to our standard curriculum? And how does our standard curriculum speak to what we want to do in trauma-informed practices? Because the last thing that we want to do, if you're talking about student wellness, the last thing that you want to do is present information to staff that makes it seem like this is just another thing that I have to do when I'm already feeling overwhelmed. Here's that piece where you look at all of these things and you're constantly saying, where is the common thread? Where is the piece of all of these different evidence-based practices or bricks or spinning plates, however you might want to call them, where we can find common threads that say, when we do these one, two, or three things really well, we fulfill and meet the needs of so many evidence-based practices that we have to build in our foundation. So then here's that building. When we're thinking about trauma-informed practices, it's because the community, the staff, students, families, and other stakeholders we might have, we're thinking about that in the respect and regard of all of these people that you see here. I'm going to pause there in the chat. What questions might you have? What aha, what huh, what uh-oh do you have about any of the information that you have received thus far? We're going to do our teacher weight. Already some coming in. Becky, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, so many adults being diagnosed later in life. And you got quite a few thumbs up there, Becky. Um, and if that diagnosis for a disability can come later in life, surely, and here's what, as you all might be thinking and putting things in the chat, especially when I'm going to date myself. When I was growing up, we did not talk about mental wellness the way we talk about it now. So it almost was like, even if there was something, who was there to kind of diagnose it and really talk about it from an asset-based lens? And because we didn't have those conversations at the time when I was growing up. And we've only recently, now I had someone tell me the other day, they were talking to their teenage daughter and was talking about maybe getting some counseling. And the woman said she was some, and you know, it's okay. There's no stigma attached. And she said her daughter looked at her and was like, Mom, we don't care about that stuff like your generation did. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. But she was like, yeah, I want a counselor. And like she had this friend at school that was seeing a therapist now. So it's so wonderful that our the younger people coming up behind us do not see stigma attached and know that, yeah, when I need support, I'm going to ask for it, just like tutoring kind of speak. So I see some things coming, hearing about the multi-tier supports for the adult along with children. Yes, Becky. Thank you. Okay. And you've been with us before. L- Linyan, come off mute and tell me how to say it again.
Lynn Ann.
I
Just,
am writing it down with so I can get my prophetic, my phonemic awareness.
yes, if my
Lynn
mom,
Ann.
she should have spelled it Lynnann, then it, but it's more fun this way.
Of course. I mean, I'm Antoinette. I've been Annette, Toinette. I've been everything except for Antoinette. So I get it. Lynn Ann, if you are ever in another webinar with me, I am gonna have it right, Lynn Ann. Okay. Thanks for review of all the definitions.
It's just nice to be able to remember all of those things instead of you assuming that we know all of those things. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I just was in a meeting yesterday and I was really emphasizing, we constantly say everything we want children to know and be able to do, we must be willing to teach them. And I was just reminding the folks that I was consulting with, that is true for adults as well. If you want teachers to know and be able to do something, we cannot operate off the assumption that, hey, everybody knows. First of all, we know that this is not a part of most in-service like I have a doctorate. I From my bachelor's to my doctorate, I did not take one course in trauma. I did not take one course in behavioral or mental health, right? So we know this is not a pre-service. At this time, pre-service from our IBHEs and ICCBs, from our higher ed world. So we have to be the ones to make sure we're explicit in talking about it. And Ann Leffler, yeah, that household challenges, that actually, I'll be honest with you all, the first time I saw that, it was like a ooh moment for me because I never connected that, especially the way they defined it out. Because I thought, oh, household challenges, that must mean poverty. But when they put right there, a child that has experienced divorce, I to be honest with you, it really kind of hit me. And I started having some conversations, even with they were adults at that time about that. And it really opened up some things, even in our family dynamics of the impact that this had on them. And it's been very, very good for our family. So that thinking about household challenges, not only for ourselves, but how that can appear when it comes to school with our children. And guess what, you all, even some of our colleagues. Karen, we have so concentrated on students that I forgot about the staff. We do have an impact on them. The question that I struggle with the most, Anne is saying, is how to build a culture of data-driven decisions. Sometimes the staff really does feel like it is one more thing. Well, Anne, you just gave us the perfect segue. Guess what? There's an app for that. Or if not an app, there's there's some slides for that. Because Lori's definitely going to be talking about data. And even when we're talking about trauma-informed practices, we just have to get to the understanding that data is a part of education. It should be a part of everything we do. It's not a bad four-letter word. It's not like what happened with these scores on, the kindergarten individual development survey or the Ames WED or all of these multiple assessments that we have. How come data is not meant to do that. Data is meant to inform us. Data is meant to guide us. So I thank you so much for that question, because you just gave us a perfect segue into Lori.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm reading Wendy's comment there too about overdiagnosing students. And I think a lot of that has to do with not knowing how to use data proactively. So we kind of wait until the end when we go straight there and make some assumptions about what a child needs before we have the chance to look at the environment, the curriculum that student is looking at, and then use that data appropriately. So we're hopefully going to get better at that the more we do it and the more we learn about it. But today we're going to take really I'm going to cover some of the same things that Antoinette did, but also expound on that. So here's a big picture view of what we're going to cover in this half of the webinar. We're going to talking about building resilience to that trauma that she was talking about. So this is truly just a taste of what all there is to know about this topic. We're going to go maybe a quarter of an inch deep. I'm going to share some resources where you can do some further research. You can learn a little bit more. And what we are going to cover today is organized for you by me as the what, the why, and the how, just to make it a little bit easier to anchor your learning. We're going to look at the what first, and that's going to include some definitions of some key frameworks and important concepts that you're going to want to know more about. And then the why those frameworks can guide your work and why you need to start planning and being proactive, and then adapting to what we're experiencing post-pandemic as our new normal. And then the how, an overview of evidence-based MTSS framework that promotes student resilience. And we're focusing in on that tier 1 piece today. And I just want to clarify that I am not an expert in trauma and resilience. A lot of the content here was curated by Dr. Patricia Graysick, who is an expert in that. And I'm bringing the MTSS side of it because that would be my background and expertise. So if you have a lot of knowledge in this area, please have grace for me if I get anything wrong or don't go deep enough for you. And also please add your thoughts, your comments, or your suggestions. That would be really great to have some comments that will build your understanding as we go through. So here's an overview of where we're going, the what, the why, and the how. So let's take a look at the what a little bit more. And I'm going to ask you to contribute right off the bat. So we are in post-pandemic, where I think most of us thought, oh, great, wonderful, we're going to get back to normal. Well, I think we've seen that normal doesn't look like normal looked before, or maybe this just is normal. I don't know. I know of a book author and speaker who once referred to normal as only a setting on your dryer and nothing else. So maybe that's all we have to work from. But as we are all adapting to some of these newer challenges that we have with students, and we certainly do, and challenges with staffing and all kinds of things, I just wanted to ask the group, in this new normal, what's your most pressing concern about teaching your kids? And if you would add something to the chat, what about that? What is it that concerns you the most about teaching your kids? We're adapting to kids who seem to come to us a little bit differently. Maybe their attendance patterns are a little different. Okay. Decreased regulation. Parents who say it's not their responsibility to support us during school hours. Now that is definitely different when I was a little girl. Whenever my teacher said, Mom was going to follow up at home. Socialization and isolation. Thanks, Kelly and Lynn Ann and Deborah. Anyone else want to take a moment to contribute? What is one of your most pressing concerns about teaching your kids? Socialization again. My concern is my catch has changed. Socialization. I think socialization for all of us, maybe for your staff also, as well as your children. What does it mean to be able to build those strong relationships again? Emerging family values, contextual factors are different. Things are different for kids. Helping students get regulated so they can learn. Okay, these are all really great. Thank you for contributing. And if you want to continue to contribute, go ahead. Yep, social emotional piece, Becky, right? And what Dr. Taylor said earlier about teaching staff what they need to know and be able to do, teaching our students how to behave, teaching students how to relate, teaching students. So breaking that down and not assuming that children already know any of this. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our what a little bit more. We're going to look at two evidence-based frameworks, the MTSS framework and then a trauma-informed framework. And we're going to talk about some of the features of each one of those and how incorporating those features into the way that we work on a daily basis can really help us to build students' resiliency against the impact of traumatic events, like the pandemic that they may have experienced. You might recognize MTSS features or trauma-informed concepts, but you might not have thought about bringing the strengths of these two frameworks together to address some of these pressing needs of our kiddos. So as Dr. Taylor said earlier, MTSS, here is our Illinois definition. There are other definitions out there and they include a lot of the same components, but MTSS is our framework for continuous improvement that's systemic and prevention focused, prevention oriented, and uses that data-based decision-making in order to provide supports that along a meaningful and coherent continuum that responds. It's not just the concrete, but it's also responsive concrete. Dr. Taylor, don't know what that is, but there's got to be something like that. Responsive concrete that molds when it needs to. And then that all learners piece. So it includes the kids, but it also includes the adults in the system as well. What's a trauma-informed framework? Well, here's one that you can think about. Here's one from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and one of those you may have heard of. They're probably the premier, if not the premier, website for information on child traumatic stress and related topics. There are resources on that website that I highly encourage you to go take a look at. And they're going to go into more detail on that website around each one of these that we'll talk about. But these include that importance of being able to identify and assess traumatic stress in students and the adults, such as teachers and parents, efforts to prevent traumatic stress and intervene when individuals are experiencing difficulties due to their trauma backgrounds, the importance of providing professional development on trauma to school staff. And that's really of critical importance as you're preparing staff for some of the needs that our kids have now. The value of partnerships with students and families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And developing a trauma-informed learning environment so that everyone feels safe and student behavior can be interpreted and then dealt with in a compassionate and responsive way. They also talk about promoting culturally responsive practices, developing and implementing emergency management and response plans, and ensuring self-care, and preventing secondary traumatic stress that staff might experience by being exposed to some of the reactions of students who are dysregulated and can't find a way to regulate. So there's a few more here that are also part of the framework. So they're looking at things like having that balanced and fair school discipline and policies and practices in place that help give students and staff more feelings of safety and control, and then using wherever we can school and community collaborations. That idea of it really does take a village to support students with some of their more complex needs. How can we reach out and as a community come together with students at the center. We want to talk a little bit more about what trauma actually is. There we go. Multiple events that can cause trauma. Dr. Taylor referred to a few of those. A child can experience multiple traumas or ongoing traumatic events in their life. Those can include things like neglect or abuse. Natural disasters can be that way. Community or school violence, even witnessing violence and serious accidents, life-threatening illnesses, loss of a loved one. There are war-related traumatic events, including experiences in a war, if a child was in that situation as a refugee or from the military deployment of a parent. Some researchers say the pandemic could be classified as a traumatic event that we all experienced. So as a nation, I think we were, as the world possibly, everyone was pretty much touched in one way or another by that trauma. And preschool children often show signs of trauma by being really overly fearful of separation from parents and caregivers. Sometimes, the experts say, sometimes by frequent or extreme crying or screaming, that dysregulation piece, and also some physical effects like poor appetite and losing weight or having extreme nightmares. Those are things that we might notice as teachers or caregivers. An important takeaway from the research on trauma is that not all children experience the same event in the same way. So some children are deeply affected by an event over the course of their lifetime, while other children in the same situation seem to cope and adapt and even thrive in spite of their experience. So according to SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, this can be due to some risk factors. Some children have more of those risk factors inherent in their personality and situation, and to protective factors, characteristics like things that are going to reduce the impact that has. And we're going to talk about some of those things and what they are as part of building resilience for students. So protective factors are those things that are sort of like a counterbalance, a counterweight to that traumatic event. And that's what we want to focus on as we work with our students. So what is resilience? Well, we can't completely remove all the traumatic events from a child's life as much as we would like to, but we can support them to cope with those protective factors. So resilience refers to the ability of an individual or a family or community to cope with adversity and trauma and to adapt to the challenges or changes as they arise. So you might be wondering, why all children aren't impacted by trauma in exactly the same way. And it's often because of those protective factors. When those protective factors are present, children are less likely to experience poor outcomes as a result of the trauma. And one reason for that is neuroplasticity, big researchy word there that Dr. Graysick so graciously put in here for us. That trauma neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change in response to social and environmental experiences. And that changeability is exactly why we get to teach, right? Because we can help students and ourselves to develop different neural pathways. And that's what we want to do. So the changes in the brain are not permanent, and they can improve over time. And that's likely to happen when students experience safe, stable, and supportive environments after trauma. So this is why we want to focus on those protective factors and resilience. This is something we can control, even though we can't change the things that these children have experienced or we have experienced, but we can offer them that safe, stable, supportive environment in our classrooms each and every day. So that's why we want to be focusing on those protective factors. So Becky said, have we ever heard about positive childhood experience and how those impact ACEs scores? that is really great to just segue us right into this. So thank you, Becky. Another term we want to think about in terms, and Becky, keep it rolling, keep your input in there. That's great. How we adverse child experiences, or ACEs. I think Dr. Taylor referred to those earlier too. So what are they? Well, ACE is a term used to describe all types of abuse, neglect, and other traumatic experiences that occur to individuals under the age of 18. Now, there was an ACEs study where let me go back, 17,000 adults looked at those three and the researchers looked at those three categories of adverse childhood experience, or ACEs: abuse, which included that emotional, physical, or sexual abuse; neglect, which was both physical or emotional; and those household challenges that Dr. Taylor mentioned earlier, which include growing up in a household where there was substance abuse, things like mental illness in the family, violent treatment of a mother or a stepmother, parental separation or divorce, or had a family who had a member of household go to prison. So respondents were given an ACE score between 0 and 10 based on how many of these adverse experiences they were exposed to when they were children. And what research has shown is that the more ACEs a child has had, the greater the risk of poor outcomes. And some of those are in that triangle. And some of those are emotional, some of those are physical impacts. Some other impacts on children can include poor outcomes in school, certainly that lack of the ability to regulate, but it doesn't mean that they're doomed to experience those negative outcomes forever because they've been exposed to ACEs because of neuroplasticity, that ability of the brain to change. So if we look at the results of a study that was done right here in Illinois, it found that 51% of children with 4 or more ACE scores had learning and behavior problems in school, compared to only 3% of children with an ACE score of 0. So that's not great news, but what else might those data tell you? Well, if we look at it a different way, that means 49% of the children with 4 or more ACEs did not have learning and behavior problems in school. Another reason why we shouldn't just assume certain things about children, and that some children with no evidence of ACEs had difficulties anyway. So really adapting that MTSS framework, where we're trying to be responsive to children's needs when we provide instruction or intervention of any kind. So thinking again back to that safe and stable environment, here are 2 big areas that we can think about. First, safety, and then sense of control when we're dealing with students or adults with that background of ACEs or any other trauma. The first we want to think about is that focus on safety has to do with concerns, things that children or adults are concerned about, their anxiety regarding maybe physical safety or that of their loved ones. And the second type of safety we can think about refers to psychological safety, such as feeling safe from bullying in a classroom, or just being judged negatively. For example, if a student has trouble paying attention or concentrating on their work, are they going to get called out for it? And then the second big category refers to the sense of control. Now, for all of us, there are a lot of things over which none of us have any control, but there are also factors that we and our students can control. We can have control over many things in our lives, and we can help our students to focus on those things that they have control over in order to help them build that sense of safety and that sense of control. And that really can help them to be better able to self-regulate, and it strengthens their resiliency and their feelings of self-efficacy. I can do this. And all of these factors together become something that we build into children to help them be more resilient to trauma. So one simple activity that you could do with a group of students is to ask them to list the things that are really important to them, or you could do this with adults too. In fact, I'm going to do that right now with you. So think about this. What are some things that you are really important to you? And then if we're doing the activity, we would start out by describing why are these things important to you? So think about, why are these things important to you? With your students, you might give an example to them so that they can get their brains thinking. What is it that's what matters to me? And then you want to help students see what they can control and feel that empowerment over it. And recognize that even though there are some things they can't control, some of the things that are the most important, they can control. So things what you want to encourage students to focus on things that matter and things that they can control. So we will go ahead and think about this for ourselves. So in your current situation, whether it's personal or professional, especially if those things are challenging for you, what are some things that are important to you, and think of those. So Becky's put an example in. Then think of things you can control about that situation. For good mental health, we want to focus on what's both important and under control. And then once you've thought of at least one thing, and if you'd like to share, please add those ideas to chat. We have a couple in there. Doing unto others as I would have them do unto me. That's, yes, wonderful. Exercise more. We can control that. So that was my example I was going to share. Health is important to me. There's a lot of things I can't control about my health and where it's going forward, but I can control what I put into my mouth. And I can eat well, so there's one thing I can also control what comes out of my mouth, but that's another issue we won't go to yet, but eating healthy. So Lynanne, that's it. So loving myself in all circumstances. So as we feel out of control as adults, and as our students feel out of control, helping them to focus on those things that we can really focus on and can control, things that we can control. Acknowledging the things we do well versus focusing on our struggles. That's an excellent example, Rochelle. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, those are good. That's something that builds resiliency, recognizing things that are important and things that we can control, even as we admit there's things we can't control. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the why. So why use an MTSS framework? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. It addresses the need, it gives us a framework to address the needs of all children. So by definition, using an MTSS should be equitable, provide equitable opportunities for students. It recognizes the focus on the whole child that Dr. Taylor talked about earlier, considering academic needs, emotional needs, behavior needs, social and emotional needs. And third, that MTSS framework is preventative. So we're not waiting until after things are surrounding a student and causing them to struggle. We're recognizing places where there could be struggles, and then we are building our system to be both preventative and a rapid response unit so that we can get to them quickly. And we're using that data all along the way to inform our practices and find out what's working and then what's not working sometimes. So MTSS, it also encourages us to respond and think about some really critical questions. And here are 3 of those. What supports and practices are we putting into place for all of our students? So that's our tier 1. That's the big focus for today. For our students who are at heightened risk, in this case for trauma, who do we know what children may have experienced multiple ACEs in their lifetime so far? And then what supports and practices do we need to put into place for those who need the most intense individualized supports that we can provide for them? And that's where we may get our community involved. And a trauma framework also uses a systematic and systemic approach that's evidence-based. So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network encourages a tiered intervention framework for all and for some and for few students. They don't exactly use a triangle, but you kind of see that there, the foundation, the middle, and the top. We're going to focus on that tier 1 or universal support today that provides that systemic approach. And we're going to use a tier 1 uses evidence-based practices to address students experiencing trauma that through all of those factors that we talked about earlier today, including lack of support, or some of those household concerns could be even financial, according to the National Traumatic Stress Network, which we know many of our students struggle with, or that home is just not a real safe place. So those are all things that using that trauma framework can help us do. So we're going to look at some strategies here for the how. So there's 6 basic strategies we want to look at as we embrace our new normal in this post-pandemic education era. First, we can be realistic about the children who are coming into our classrooms, the things they've already experienced, what they may have missed out on in their backgrounds, especially in the upper, as we get farther away from preschool, there are kids who missed a whole year of school or big chunks of it. And we can set realistic expectations about how kids are, how have they experienced the trauma of the pandemic, along with and maybe on top of other things that were also traumatic for them in their experience. And we know different children respond differently to the same experience, so we want to provide that support where it's needed. And then we want to be really proactive about what students need for academics or social emotional learning. We want to be sure that we are planning ahead for what we know they're going to need when we transition them from level to level, from grade to grade, and looking at when we transition, especially from kindergarten to first grade, or is first grade looking at what those kindergarten students have coming in, use that data in that way. And I think that will be very helpful. We want to stay hopeful, right? We know this is tough work, but we want to build hope and work on our own resiliency wherever we can. And then we want to be sure that we are always, always, always using those evidence-based practices, whether they are small or large, looking towards what does the evidence say is the best way for me to address the needs in front of me, the students that I have. We want to be always aware and being intentional about promoting adult and child resiliency, and that control piece is a piece of that. And especially at tier 1, integrating all this into what we offer all of our students, and knowing that positive relationships are really core to all of this that we do. Positive relationships with our children, and as staff, positive relationships with each other. So really looking for that positive. I think somebody mentioned that over there, doing unto others as we would like them to do unto us. I think that's a great thing to work for and to build around. So there's 4 R's according to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And again, you can look on their website and find out more of these about these. I'm just touching it briefly, but when we're adopting a trauma-informed approach, we want to think about these big 4 R's. So we want to think about realizing trauma's impact, that it's real, and whether or not we deal with it, it's going to have some impacts on us. So we want to be sure that we give effort towards addressing the trauma that's there, and providing some pathways for students and staff to recover. We want to learn to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. We want to be able to respond by building our own knowledge about what this is and integrating that knowledge in the way we do business every day. We want to be sure that we are resisting re-traumatizing students and staff who have been impacted by trauma. by decreasing the triggers as much as we can. I can give you an example here where I am in Peoria, close to a city, Washington, where I'm actually very close to that city. There is a very traumatic tornado not long ago. And as a result, for a long period of time, they did not do the Tuesday morning classic alarm that we all have gotten used to every Tuesday at 10. They did not use that in the schools because it was traumatic. It was triggering to so many students to hear that siren again because of all the devastation that they had yet around them as they went outside. So that's an example. It's an extreme example, but you probably can find some other things in your own classrooms and schools that you can be aware of as you notice what kind of trauma your students have been exposed to. So we want to remember that using that trauma-informed approach is an evidence-based framework, and using it as a tiered support, like here, what you see here, providing different levels of support to different students. So some other ideas for tier 1, of course, we're going to start with those adults. Adults need to be okay before they can help students to be okay. So what are some resilient strategies for staff and parents and caregivers? Well, we're going to encourage adults to seek out their own strong and supportive relationships. That's important. You need to take care of yourself. Do things that make them happy, that you enjoy every day. Do something that you just enjoy. Even those weak relational ties to people, when you go for a walk and see somebody and you just say hi, or you go to the same grocery store and you go through the same checkout and you know the person, or you sit at the coffee shop and maybe they know your order. Those weak ties, research tells us, can help us feel part of the larger community and can really help improve our well-being. So that means I need to sometimes get off of my phone and I need to look up and I need to interact with the people around me. And whatever we're doing, asking ourselves, is this helping me? Is this media I'm watching? Am I doom scrolling, or is this hurting me, or is this helping me? And then even with discussions with others, is this helping me or is this hurting me? And really trying to focus on those things that are supporting you and separate yourself from those things that aren't, and encouraging your staff to do that. We want to learn to focus on those things that matter and things that we can control, like we talked to earlier. We want to be kind and patient with ourselves, and make sure that the words that I say to me are as nice as the words that I would say to Antoinette. So, I think that matters. That's something we can encourage children to, when we hear them talk to themselves, oh, that was dumb, or you dummy, or whatever, to kind of move in there and say, oh, no, that's not dumb at all. And then if we need to have some time to just go let the tears fall, or scream into a pillow, or just wallow for a few minutes, research says that's something we can take time to do. Now, put a timer on it. Don't stay there forever. But if you need to just have some time to wallow in the sadness that you feel, sometimes the best way through it is just to kind of take a look at it, experience it, and then move on, so that we don't find ourselves just ruminating forever. So we want to, this should look familiar to most people here. We want to be sure that we're using some kind of a model to support us in promoting that positive school climate and culture for our students. So many of you are already using the pyramid model. There's listed some other ideas on this slide that might also be something you would look into if you don't have something in place that has strong evidence behind it. Here's another idea. There's several more curricula here that you might consider. There's second step, conscious discipline, paths, calm classroom. You may have something else you want to pop into the chat that you're using. That's a great resource to think about, having something to include that's going to support building that resiliency for your students. And that self-regulate came up earlier, and here are, that's a real strong protective factor, the science would say. And here's some suggestions of some ALS-PALS, thanks, Kristen, of some calming strategies from that National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. They have a lovely website and you can use these to model and to teach your kiddos. They have this particular poster in English and Spanish. And then there's another similar resource on here that's more of an infographic. It's aimed at parents, things parents can do to help calm their children. And that's available on that website in English and Spanish and Somali and Hmong. That is aimed at those parents and helps them. So those are great resources if you want to take a look at those. Some other tier 1 strategies that you can use to build your students' resilience, being sure that you're using age appropriate language, but you are discussing the things and talking with children. Have a plan for how you're going to talk to kids. Maybe get together as a staff and say, what language are we going to use? And being careful not to go into too much detail, and just staying back at the facts. And when you need to go a little deeper, maybe you grab or connect with a mental health professional who's really going to help you to identify the best way to approach some of those things, or have a script or a social story. Yep. Thank you, Wendy. Co-regulate. Yep. Being really concrete with them. So having that some kind of a script that maybe you prepare in advance to talk with your students, especially for those students with special needs, to make sure that you're using language and concepts and even examples that they can understand and relate to. And then discussing feelings with the kids and then normalizing those. So there's grammar grace, Wendy. There are feelings. We feel sad, but that is normal to feel sad, anger, to feel sadness, to feel worry. All those things, especially under traumatic or abnormal circumstances, are fully normal. And then helping make sure that every kid in your classroom or your school has the opportunity to connect with a caring adult. One of my colleagues recommends that staff just make a list of all the kids in their school and then identify what adult has interacted with them. And you'll find some names in there that maybe just don't get interactions from adults. And then you can push in and provide some of that connection. Some other tier 1 strategies you might think about, that co-regulating that Wendy just put in there, modeling the behavior. You know, a think aloud. We're used to think alouds in different kinds of instructional modes. Well, you can do a think aloud also about regulating yourself. Walk through those steps, how you're feeling and what you're going to do and what action you're going to take. And I think that NCPMI, the Pyramid Model website, has a Tucker Turtle. Has anybody used that? Who has some lessons around there. You can model some of those strategies for calming and self-regulating. If you've used Tucker Turtle and want to put something in the chat. So helping students recognize what those strategies are and then consistently checking in and reassuring those students that, you know, need some reassurance. And you might keep a tally or a roster somewhere on your person or on your desk so you can make sure you have checked in with everybody. Even though that might mean listening to the same boo-boo story for the umpteenth time, still making sure that we're connecting with every one of our children. That's something we can do for all kiddos. And then a few other things we can do to strengthen student resilience are routines in our classrooms. Using predictability helps to build safety, providing children choices as often as we can, and helping families and students to know that routines can be really helpful for them as well. And communicating, parents might do well to have bedtime rituals, sleeping at the same time each night, waking up at the same time, dinner time being the same, maybe visual schedules that you use in your classroom so they can see this is happening now, this is what comes next, this is what comes next. So that predictability becomes a part of classroom instruction, helps build that feeling of safety in your classroom and in your school. So now it's time for you to share a few suggestions. If you have some, are there things that you've done to promote mental health, self-regulation, and resilience in your own classrooms? And would you like to put those in as we close so that everybody can learn from each other? I always love that when we can do that for each other, because you guys have tried some amazing things. You just don't know how amazing you are. Daily Calm Classroom. Lynn, thanks. 2 times a day, daily morning meetings. Trusting relationships. Negative self-talk. Yes, Becky, I'm on your team. Same. Intimacy, songs. Oh, I love that. Oh, they're wonderful. Okay. Praise, problem solving skills, open-ended questions with empathy. Yeah, and you can do that as a group and you do that one-on-one, culturally appropriate. Yep. I think that's a big one. It's easy to let that one slip sometimes when we're thinking more mental health focused, but that was included. Okay, go ahead and put giving them words to their feelings. Yep, I have a 6-year-old grandson whose mom is a social worker. That boy can tell you more things about the way he feels than it took me the first 35 years of life to do. So it's wonderful having that language. He has the language to say how he feels. Yeah, including about my cooking. So that's fine though. We won't worry about that too much. He doesn't always like what I put on the table for dinner, but okay. It's all right. Normalizing feelings. Wonderful. Okay. So here's another tier 1 strategy you might consider, and that's just really focusing on nurturing gratitude in students and in adults. Whether you're going to do that as a think aloud or part of that morning meeting, classroom promise, there we go. Look at that. Some being able to express your gratitude is really, really a powerful factor in building your own resilience and helping your students build resilience too. You could have students just take a moment to express gratitude for each other. They could, if they're old enough to write about it, they could write about something or draw a picture of something that they're grateful for. It could be something you do at the beginning or the end of the day. You could include this the adults in it by encouraging them to write notes to each other. I've seen like big boards in just the common area for teachers where they'll just put notes up. I really appreciated that so-and-so did this and it was wonderful. Thank you. So being able to build that in opportunities for gratitude. And I really think that's something that's very helpful too. And as I go through, I'm just going to quickly go through a few more things you might take a look at. One is psychological first aid for schools. If you especially have a major traumatic event, this is something that any school can do. It doesn't have to be delivered by mental health professionals, but this guidebook is available for free on their website. So you can take a look at that. It will give you some real step-by-step actions that you can take in terms of creating that strong culture and climate that will support your students. And here are 8 of those that they put together. But again, if you can find that resource on the website, it's really laid out well. And they have some videos that go along with those as well that can be supportive to you. So another one you might think about, so this is that PFA, psychological first aid for schools. Again, just some features of that. Any member can do it. You don't have to have mental health professionals, although it's always wonderful to have them and we love them. It can adapt for students with disabilities or other impairments. It's culturally relevant and it includes what to do and what we should avoid doing. So it's a wonderful resource, that guidebook, if you can find that on that website. Then using that data, of course, you know I was going to go there, right? Using data to inform your work, whether you use already some sort of a screener, maybe you want something a little more formal. Some of these do include preschool. So the SABRS is preschool through high school. The BESS is ages 3 to 18. And then the SABRS is actually K-12. It's the SDQ that's free, but also preschool through high school. So having some sort of a screener might be helpful to kind of formalize the data that you have to take a look at that, or it can be something as simple as what students have that connection on a daily basis. So we've kind of looked at the what and the why and the how so far. I hope that you had at least one takeaway from either what I had to say, what Dr. Taylor had to say, or some of the fantastic things that have been put into chat already. Lots of ideas. I hope we're saving the chat and can okay, we are going to do that. Great. So one thing we want to point out for you, we have a few little announcements. Whoops, excuse me. On the end here. Coming up next, we're going to have a few more offerings here. And I want to say thank you again for the Early Childhood Professional Learning ECPL and letting us come together and collaborate on this. It's been wonderful, and we hope you continue to show up. We have on March the 5th, we're going to be doing the Tier 2 and 3 focus of building resiliency for our students affected by trauma. And so we hope that you come for that if you haven't already. There's
And
something
Lori,
you want to say?
real quick before we go on, I've been taking so many notes here, and I think what we'll be able to do already. There's 69 people registered for this one for March 5th, and more are coming. So if you haven't registered yet, keep them coming, keep them coming. And we know that you all are busy. And so as we look at that tiers 2 and 3, which is really like, okay, you've done all these universal things. Now, what does it look like to make it more targeted or more intensive? I think what we'll be able to do, as much as possible, pull some specific things from the websites that we've talked about today, and then some of the notes I've been taking from your input of questions that you had, so that it's like going to be a smorgasbord of ideas. Of course, we're going to talk about what tiers 2 and 3 look like for an MTSS framework, but spend a lot of time on March 5th kind of like dropping in a link and saying, you know, on this particular link here, go to the website. You will literally find this here or there, and have time to walk through it. So just bring your smorgasbord appetite and your doggy bag, because there'll be more than enough. And then maybe we can create, we'll be able to, like a resource page or something. Because
That's
we
what I
won't
was
have
just
time to
thinking.
get to everything. Yeah. So just,
There's so much there.
I just was so excited, just threw that in.
So I'm really excited about this, and I wanted to share with all of this group. So we're going to be combining with NIU STEAM, so Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Math group at NIU, and we're going to have a conference on June the 7th, where we're talking about using MTSS to support students in literacy and STEAM. We're very excited about the idea of integrating those things. Dr. Taylor will be presenting a session there. There will be other sessions aimed at early childhood, especially as we consider it through age 8. And we'll have speaker there from the Illinois State Board of Education literacy planning team. So the team that put together the literacy plan for the state will have a couple of representatives, 1 or 2 there, to present and to talk to us about the plan and what it means for us as educators. So if you want to register, that registration is open at our website, ilmtss.niu.edu. So please, I think we have room for 250. So as many early childhood practitioners as we could get there would be wonderful. It's also good for administrators. There'll be some sessions. We'll have some 50-minute sessions, some double sessions where you'll actually get to do some hands-on things. We'll have a keynote speaker and a panel, we hope. So we're hoping to have all those things. So thanks again to Cindy and Early Childhood Professional Learning, and to Antoinette, and thank you. And I'm going to turn this over a couple minutes late to Susie, who's going to wrap us up.
And we're going to talk real fast. Susie's going to wrap us up, and also drop in the chat the Early Childhood Preschool for All expansion conference. Is going to be held in person for the first time since the pandemic, April 22nd. through the 23rd. Susie's going to drop that in the chat. If you haven't registered already, please make sure you do. I did see some folks on here that were from some of our community-based organizations, which we love, love, love. If you receive any type of preschool for all or preschool for all for education funding, this is the place to be. It is actually the last conference before some of the new changes in early childhood that are going to be taking place July 1. So come on, tap me on the back. I'll be there. And as Lori said, I'll be there June 7th. And we're going to, for real, turn it over to Lori. I mean, to Susie. Thank you all so much for your time today.